A new chapter in space exploration. NASA's Artemis mission is about to begin. Tonight, its next-generation spaceship with the world's most powerful rocket is on the launch pad at the Kennedy Space Center, ready for the test flight that will pave the way for humans to return to the moon for the first time in 50 years.
So how real is this going back to the moon?
Oh, it's very real. We're definitely going. We're going to actually live there. We will have landers go to the moon, we'll have rovers on the moon, and eventually we'll have a base camp on the moon.
Once beyond the pole of Earth's gravity, the Orion capsule perched atop of the rocket will orbit the moon for 42 days, uncrewed, but with male and female astronaut dummies loaded with sensors to study the potential effects of the mission on future real astronauts. Jessica Meir is one of 18 veteran astronauts, part of the Artemis team, who could fly on the first mission to the moon since 1972. The goal, learn more about the moon and use it as a jumping-off point to Mars.
This is Artemis Launch Control with an update. Launch Director Charlie Blackwell-Thompson has called a scrub for today. Again, Launch Director Charlie Blackwell-Thompson has called a scrub of the attempt of launch of Artemis 1 and the Space Launch System with the Orion spacecraft.
All right, but I'm still making my video. So I guess we have to wait another week for the big return to the moon, but it's probably for the best. I was waiting to record something until we were airborne, till we had some sort of footage to comment on, but I guess we can do a pre-bunk video, since apparently that's a thing now. Pre-bunking. But yeah, I was looking forward to this in a weird way. These are like the only... It's like the only movies that I look forward to being released anymore. So I'm sure the art department at NASA is very, very sorry for the delay. There was a few shots that they just hadn't quite finished yet. It wasn't ready, so that's Hollywood for you. Sometimes you don't make the deadlines and you gotta push it back. It happens. I mean, this is no small production that we're putting together for you guys. In case you didn't know. Man. Where to begin? So is it just me, or is it just super weird how this is all going on in the midst of so many other things, and you can't help but wonder, like, do people really care? Are people really excited about this? I mean, I know you can look in the comments of all these Artemis videos and promos and stuff and see like all the NASA fanboys and girls. fan people geeking out, and they're all excited to go to the moon again. But it doesn't really need a lot of spelling out at this point how the wokeification of culture and government and media and everything around us, everything from every giant corporate angle is pushing the same agendas and same messaging. And
for the first time, a female voice.
We've changed a lot in terms of the makeup of our team. One woman on the team in 1969. Today, we'll have 30 women in the room.
She calls it just the start.
The next set of boot prints that are left on the moon by our astronauts will belong to a woman and a person of color. There are no boundaries, there are no limits. And launch director copies.
A woman with a mission to inspire.
There's a lot you could kind of scrutinize, I suppose, about the Artemis symbology on its own as the sister of Apollo, and how much this whole event is supposed to mirror the significance, okay, in the minds of the public, I suppose. It's supposed to mirror the significance and the science and the achievement of Apollo in 1969 through 72, right? But I don't know. I don't know if that's really landing with people the same way as it did way back then when, people tell stories of being woken up as little kids to go watch the moon landing with their parents and stuff like that. I was not around for that moment, but I think about it a lot more and more, and what that was like in the context of everything else that was going on in the country, in the world, politically, economically, spiritually, and how this, alchemical event of some kind, this wizardry of television, and, really, like, Kennedy, and then he's assassinated, and then you got years of Vietnam, and LSD, and Operation Paperclip, and Nazis at Disney, and, it's a wild build-up to Apollo. It's been a pretty wild build-up in the 20 years to now, but in the post 9/11 era, it's a crazy comparison. You can make interesting comparisons all day long, especially after that last video when I was marveling at the fact that Borla wrote this book entitled "A Moonshot." But yeah, there's a whole special I was watching just called Moonshot, and it's like this big long documentary talking all about the whole process of the original guys who were the test pilots, and they all had a backstory, and they all had, it was like a reality show. Really, if you watch all these little clips and newsreels, and the way they all built it up with the manned flight center that was there in outside of Houston. It was basically the big studio where they just filmed this reality show over years and years. And the NASA studio, as it were, had this whole, it's such a perfect way of looking at it, because it's easier to understand it now that way, now that, the non-reality of reality television is something we all are much more familiar with. But back then, it was a whole different controlled mediascape and everything. So very interesting. What is even the goal here? We know what the goal is on paper, but whether they're actually gonna, I'd be lying if I said I wasn't curious to see what they're actually gonna come up with to show now that, okay, we're not constricted to film. Like the last time they supposedly went to the moon, it was with vacuum tubes and film that had to be developed and somehow survive all the radiation of space and everything else. So yeah, we've got a lot more, there should be little tiny digital cameras just attached to everything all the time, right? Recording the surface. They're supposedly going to orbit the surface of the moon at like 50 miles around it. So you should get some pretty spectacular moon surface footage, even though there's no astronauts in this particular capsule. But no, there's two mannequins, crash test dummies, basically with sensors and everything. A male and female dummies, which I find fascinating as well in the context of the current cultural conundrum of male and female. I mean, that's some pretty binary thinking, NASA. What's that? I mean, how do you virtue signal to, in a way, to where you're giving yourself kudos for putting women on the moon for the first time, but we also have this whole I mean, I can't even. Are these biological women? I mean, do the mannequins have any differences between them, or did you just make them? I mean, it's a whole can of worms right there. Male and female mannequins. Oh boy, you stepped in it now. The whole thing is just eating itself before it's even off the ground. And if you think of it like archetypally, it's like, okay, we got to rewrite all the stuff from the 50s and 60s that was patriarchal and all these white guys and suits and the woke cosmism is already here. So yeah, what a circus, dude.
How real is this going back to the moon?
Oh, it's very real. We're definitely going. We're going to actually live there.
It's hard not to wonder if this is just kind of part of the last ditch, the last round of bread and circuses as things in this part of the world, this long-standing American hegemony over, military and economic matters. If this is just one of the, like, it doesn't matter if it's just not really the same impact. Like, it doesn't even matter if it's really all that convincing or... Yeah, I mean, I feel like what are we going to get? Just a bunch of computer graphics and like one little shot out of a grainy window again. I mean, it's crazy because like on that Holter thing from the other day where they're hyping it up, like half of this news report that he's doing about the Artemis missions, and he's talking to this 21st century era, woman astronaut.
How exciting is it, the prospect of going to the moon for you personally?
It's incredibly exciting. We haven't been there since the 70s, and it's really time to go back. To me, it's about exploration. It's just an inherent part of all of us as humans. We had this profound impact on society when we went to the moon the first time with all of this stimulation of resources in all the STEM fields. So we can expect that all when we go back to the moon again.
It's just crazy. Like, when you watch those old films of the guy, it was just like years between like Gemini and Apollo and all the build up to it was all nonsense when you really look at it. Like how quickly they went from like shooting a guy in the tip of a rocket around the globe once, one time, and then parachuting into the ocean, and then we got to do the rendezvous, But it was all. There was so much hype about like, just are they going to survive and are they going to withstand the G-forces and the radio? It was just training and physical. It was about their test pilots, man. This is the right stuff and all that jazz. Very lots of toxic masculinity kind of stuff, and that is gone. This ain't your daddy's space program anymore. But anyways, have this report. He's just talking about they let him test drive their trainer. They have this whole VR, they already have the moon all mapped out. See, with like probes or whatever, so that they've got a 3D environment of the moon that they can already train on in their VR rover simulator thing. And so he's driving it around, and you're just going like, we have this much detailed information about like every crater and rock so they can simulate the lighting and everything just perfectly. And yeah, okay. But yeah, NASA basically was pioneering in virtual reality since the early 80s or late 70s even. And it's pretty amazing to realize, like, why would they be messing around with that? Oh, it's because they are the real industrial light and magic show. The OG. And man, yeah, the interplay between quote unquote real space travel and real rocketry and cinema goes back to even before the 50s and 60s and Apollo and all that. When you learn about Fritz Lang, who was the guy who directed Metropolis, but in 1929 he directed Woman in the Moon, or Frau im Mond in German. And Hermann Oberth was, considered he was like the godfather of German rocketry. And I believe he was even before Goddard and everything, who was kind of the American counterpart. But so he was an advisor on this movie in the 1920s. And then later, when the Nazis took power in Germany, they seized all of his notes and props and everything from this movie because supposedly it was all too close to the real the real designs and everything. So Herman Oberth, kind of like how 2001 had all this, NASA advisors, and Arthur C. Clarke was going back and forth between Kubrick Studios in London and the NASA guys over here and IBM, and it was all this cross collaboration. IBM, which also had quite a bit of business in Germany during World War II. But Herman Oberth was a teacher of a young Werner von Braun, who then later, of course, rose to prominence in World War II and came over as the most famous member of Project Paperclip. But there were many others, and But anyways, Woman in the Moon is cited as the first occurrence of the countdown to zero before a rocket launch. So that was actually Fritz Lang, or his wife, I suppose, who was a main writer of his stuff. But yeah, that came from, the countdown came from movies first, before it was ever utilized in a actual real rocket. Interesting. But the whole mythological, romantic fantasy element of cinema in space has been around like multiple cycles of capturing the public imagination and distracting from things or propelling other things, all tied up in wars funded by bankers and economic upheaval, and it's crazy, dude. Like the more you learn about how this stuff kind of just cycles through the memescape and the script room of the Matrix, or whatever you want to call it. Satan is really good at recycling lies and recycling mythological. I mean, that's kind of what the whole history of our obsession with not just Greek mythology, but all mythologies and all these pantheons of gods and goddesses, and who are all divine and yet human and imperfect, and generations come and go, always seeking some new wave of enlightenment or new wave of, freedom from oppression, whether real or imagined. Yeah, here's a V2 rocket with the Woman in the Moon decal on the nose because it was, basically modeled after. Yeah, so...
A culture dominated by men. Even years later, when Charlie Blackwell Thompson first visited Kennedy Space Center as a college senior.
I thought I would love to be in this room one day.
Today, she isn't just in the room, but leading it as launch director for Artemis 1. A critical step in returning Americans to the moon and beyond.
She really is a goddess who runs everything that goes on, the processing and the launch operations.
She really is a goddess.
She really is a goddess
who runs everything.
Now after these events, Paul resolved in the Spirit to pass through Macedonia and Achaia and go to Jerusalem, saying, After I have been there, I must also see Rome. And having sent into Macedonia 2 of his helpers, Timothy and Erastus, he himself stayed in Asia for a while. About that time there arose no little disturbance concerning the way. For a man named Demetrius, a silversmith, who made silver shrines of Artemis, brought no little business to the craftsmen. These he gathered together with the workmen in similar trades and said, Men, you know that from this business we have our wealth. And you see and hear that not only in Ephesus, but in almost all of Asia, this Paul has persuaded and turned away a great many people, saying that gods made with hands are not gods. And there is a danger not only that this trade of ours may come into disrepute, but also that the temple of the great goddess Artemis may be counted as nothing, and that she may even be deposed from her magnificence, she whom all Asia and the world worship. When they heard this, they were enraged and were crying out, Great is Artemis of the Ephesians! So the city was filled with confusion, and they rushed together into the theater, dragging with them Gaius and Aristarchus, Macedonians who were Paul's companions in travel. But when Paul wished to go in among the crowd, the disciples would not let him. And even some of the Asiarchs, who were friends of his, sent to him and were urging him not to venture into the theater. Now some cried out one thing, some another, for the assembly was in confusion, and most of them did not know why they had come together. Some of the crowd prompted Alexander, whom the Jews had put forward, and Alexander, motioning with his hand, wanted to make a defense to the crowd. But when they recognized that he was a Jew, for about 2 hours they all cried out with one voice, "Great is Artemis of the Ephesians!" And when the town clerk had quieted the crowd, he said, "Men of Ephesus, who is there who does not know that the city of the Ephesians is temple keeper of the great Artemis, and of the sacred stone that fell from the sky?" That's interesting. "Seeing then that these things cannot be denied, you ought to be quiet and do nothing rash, for you have brought these men here who are neither sacrilegious nor blasphemers of our goddess. If therefore Demetrius and the craftsmen with him have a complaint against anyone, the courts are open, and there are proconsuls. Let them bring charges against one another. But if you seek anything further, it shall be settled in the regular assembly. For we really are in danger of being charged with rioting today, since there is no cause that we can give to justify this commotion." And when he had said these things, he dismissed the assembly. After the uproar ceased, Paul sent for his disciples, and after encouraging them, he said farewell and departed from Macedonia. How dare they say that gods made with hands are not gods? It's amazing how much of Ephesus, the remains of Ephesus, are still there today, like including the main street through the city, like the main market, and the ruins of the temple, the theater where the big riot, like the assembly of the craftsmen, it was all, so you can go walk where Paul and the apostles walked and faced this riot because of all the preaching they were doing and all the people who were getting mad. Getting mad because the truth was setting people free from bondage to their hustle, right? And the Temple of Artemis was, one of the 7 great wonders of the ancient world, and was just this massive building that took like 140 years to build and then rebuild again. And there's conflicting claims about when the 3rd version of the temple was actually destroyed for the last time and who was responsible for it. Claims about columns being used in the Hagia Sophia, mosque. It was a Byzantine church that became a mosque. But I don't know. It's just, in whatever case, it's basically Christianity. Christianity destroyed the temple one way or the other. Is kind of the narrative, right? What was the stone that fell from heaven, I wonder? So yeah, Artemis of the Ephesians. And here we are in 2022. People were chanting for hours, "Great is Artemis of the Ephesians," because they were so devoted to their deity. Isn't it? I mean, the fact that it's like one of Artemis's main facets is being a goddess of a fertility goddess, of all things. I mean, that seems like weird timing, What some people would say that's synchronicity, but no, fertility goddess in a time when fertility is an interesting topic of discussion and debate and science. I find that really interesting.
It's very real. We're definitely going. We're going to actually live there.